What's up, my friends? On this week's episode of The Chop Shop, we're going to get into some questions. Try that again. What's up, my friends? On this week's episode of The Chop Shop, we're going to get into some questions about my experience growing up in the church. You're going to want to catch this. And so what I went ahead and did, and if you're not familiar with ChatGPT, is I asked ChatGPT to give me some questions, to ask me some questions about my experience growing up in the church. So in a weird way, this is kind of like Chat GPT interviewing me about my experience growing up in the church. Now, my experience growing up in the local church, I grew up in a Latino, Hispanic, mainly Spanish-speaking church. So just to give you some context of like some of the things I'm going to talk about. But I believe that a lot of these things you kind of see across the board. Like if you grew up in church, like you probably had similar experiences. So I kind of wanted to get in these questions and just kind of have some fun, talk about them, and as always, just kind of have a conversation about growing up in church, what that's like, the benefits of that, some of the challenges. There are challenges in that as well. So let's get into these questions. Before I do that, because I got a lot of people saying how much they enjoyed me doing this, I'm going to open up another LaCroix because I like LaCroix, and so I'm going to pour myself a little bit of LaCroix. This is the beach plum flavor. Really good. I know a lot of people don't like Ruthie hates sparkling water, so she doesn't like LaCroix at all. But if there's a flavor that you want to try and get someone to kind of enter into the sparkling water world, it would have to probably be this one, the beach plum. And that's only because it sounds weird, but it's a little bit more sweeter, a little bit easier on the palate, like for people to get used to the sparkling water. Anyway, this is not a sparkling water podcast, but I really liked the LaCroix. So, okay, we're gonna get into these questions, and we're gonna talk about growing up in church. Also, got to give a shout out to my son Abel, who put this Lego thing together here. You probably don't see it very well there, but he loves Legos and he's really good at putting them together. So he put it together. He saw me bring out my microphone for this episode and said, "Hey, Dad, you could put this on your podcast if you want." So Abel, thank you. I'm using it on my podcast. I'm gonna put them right here. And yeah, so thanks, Abel. Appreciate that. And then also Abel did that Among Us Mario drawing, but he's really good at drawing too. So, okay, growing up in the church. So here's the first question. And again, questions are provided by ChatGPT. And I told ChatGPT to ask me some questions about my experience in church, what those questions would be. Just give me some questions, and this is what it came up with. So, quickly, just to give you some context. Again, grew up in the Spanish-speaking church. My grandfather was the pastor for a majority of the time that I grew up in this church, probably till I was about 19, 20, and then he retired, and then somebody else took over. So I'm going to just talk about my whole experience growing up in church within that period, the first 19, 20 years, and then that's what I'm going to be referencing here, okay? So first question is, how did being a pastor's grandkid influence your social life in the church community? So kind of looked at this question and thought, did it affect it in a negative way, in a positive way? Did people, cast me out to the side because I was a pastor's grandkid and they didn't want the pastor's grandkid to hear all the gossip or anything? And the cool thing is, like, it didn't really affect it in a negative way. There are a lot of kids my age in the church, and I got along with most of them. I don't think I've ever really experienced anybody like, let's not include Ben into this, group, or let's not talk to him because he's the pastor's grandkid. In fact, I was one of 12 grandkids, and there were 10 of us that grew up in the church with my grandpa. Two of them, Aaliyah and Paul, grew up in Southern California. So there were 10 of us that grew up in the church together at the same time. So it wasn't just me. There was there was quite a few of us. But I didn't feel like I was ever, not included or put to the side, or like I didn't feel like I had any negative experience in my social life at church. In fact, if anything, I think it might have helped. I think people really felt comfortable with me because they knew my family, they knew my parents, they knew my grandfather, obviously. I will say there were probably cousins of mine that grew up in the church at the same time that maybe had some different experiences. But for me, I'd say the way it influenced my social life is it really opened the door for me to have a lot of friends. And I did, and I do. There are a lot of guys and girls nowadays who are my age, adults, have their own kids that even some of them don't go to church. You know who you are, but we keep in touch through social media, and it's really cool. Like it's like we kind of have a bond that way. Like we grew up together, and I just like grew up in the streets or grew up at school, but we grew up in the church together. So I still keep in touch with a lot of them. So next question is, what are some of your earliest memories of attending church as a child? If I had to really think back, I think honestly a lot of it was just me and my cousins and my brother like playing outside after church and before church, like using all the in between service times and just to play, just to like hang out, run around, start trouble. In the mid-90s, our church got into this old warehouse here in Santa Rosa. And it literally was just a warehouse. It was 4 walls, a warehouse. And the church men rallied around and started doing construction and building walls and just doing everything, like turning this old warehouse into a church. And that meant every Saturday, sometimes during the week as well, weeknights, these men would come together. They would work for 3 or 4 hours, maybe more, after they worked their full-time job. And then the women would be there cooking dinner. And so if the men are there and the women are there, then the kids have to be there too, So like I remember after school going to church, not for service, but like literally just to spend time because my dad was working and my mom was cooking. And well, that means we get extra playing time. So I always, remember those times. When I was like really young, it's kind of vague, like I don't remember a whole lot, but I would say like around like 7 and 8, like I remember just running around with a bunch of different kids, even kids that I don't remember their names, but I remember their faces. I don't remember everyone's name, but I do remember faces. And so some of those kids' faces, I'll see every now and then, like through an old home video. I'm like, I remember that kid, So those were some of my earliest memories. I mean, honestly, one of my favorite memories when I was a kid, it was in the sanctuary of this warehouse that was becoming a church. And there were like maybe 4 or 5, maybe more mountains, like stacks of just sheetrock that were in the room where the sanctuary is now. And I remember me and my cousins, and other kids, we would just run around in that sanctuary while guys were working, and we would play hide and go seek among these mountains of sheetrock. And I would remember because when we would be done, my pants, my clothes, all covered in like that white like sheetrock dust. So those are some of my favorite memories, honestly. And then obviously getting in trouble too. That happened quite a bit. But let's see. How did your family balance their roles as pastors with their roles as your grandparents? So again, my grandpa was a pastor, and my grandmother a pastor. And in our church, the women weren't necessarily given a pastor title. They weren't necessarily called pastor. Like if the husband was a pastor, they weren't necessarily called a pastor themselves. But my grandmother, and it's something that I didn't like really realize or recognize till later on, but I'm like, she totally is a pastor. She still is. Like she loves people, serves people, and is just there to help people. And that's what a pastor is. And so, but my grandparents like never treated any of us, like me or my siblings, even my cousins, never treated us any different than any of the other kids at church. So, and you may think like, they did it so the other kids weren't jealous, but that's not the way my grandparents did it. My grandparents like loved the kids, and so it was natural for them to show us love because we're their grandkids. But like, we were never given any special attention. We were always we always call them Nana and Papa, right? Even during church, during service at church, like we weren't ever told like call me pastor or anything, So my grandparents kept it like like real, like just hey, I'm your Nana, I'm your Papa, like that's who we are. You call us that. But in the same time, in the same vein, like my grandparents treated all the kids the same. My grandfather was notorious for having candies in his pocket and handing them to little kids, and it would be his way of like having the kid come over so he can give the kid a hug. My grandpa would always have candies, and just kind of thinking about it, like at my granddad's, my papa's funeral, one of my dear friends came to me, and just, they're making their rounds and their condolences to the family, and they came to me and gave me a hug, and obviously I was crying, but I remember my friend told me, like, you guys, thank you because you guys shared them with us, you shared him with us, and you guys never like complained about that, and we didn't. Dang it, I'm such a crybaby, but like my grandfather loved people, loved kids, and you could see how much he enjoyed doing that. And so for us, it was like, it didn't ever bother me, at least. I know for sure it didn't bother me. Maybe it bothered my cousins, but it never bothered me to see him love on other kids or like, give kids candy or anything like. And so when my friend told me that, like, hey, thank you guys so much for sharing him with us, and you guys never complained, and like that meant a lot, so yeah. But my grandparents were my grandparents' church. They weren't, hey, call me pastor, call me bishop. Like, I'm your papa. In the same token, like, there are plenty of times during service when me and my cousins would be sitting together in church, and like he would call us out in the middle of service if we were fooling around, and he would play it off like, hey, whose kids are those? Those kids need to stop talking. And even though he would say those kids and like play it off like he didn't know who we were, we knew that he knew exactly who we were, so but honestly, he did that with not just us, he did it with other kids too. Like, so that's what I'm saying. Everybody was on the same playing field. Nobody was given special privileges or anything like that at all. Let's see. What were some of the cultural traditions or customs that were unique to your Latino church? So, grew up in a Pentecostal church. In our denomination, we had and have English churches, but we also have Spanish churches as well. So it's kind of interesting, the dynamic, how it plays sometimes, because, you have a Spanish church that it functions one way, and you go to an English church, and even though there's obviously a lot of things that are similar, obviously beliefs, structure, and all that, a lot of cultural things are just different, where they almost seem like two completely different churches. And so I wouldn't say there was anything like unique about our church that, if you've never been in Hispanic church, or you've never been in part of Latino church, like, it was pretty the same as everyone else across the board, as far as like just how services went, how people worked together, how ministry was done, and even some of how the faults, like there's faults in every church. So even those are the same also across the board. But I wouldn't say there was necessarily any like unique traditions, cultural traditions, or customs. We always would do like a Sunday lunch after service in the morning, and that meant potluck, or that meant a family was running that food, that food sale, and they were running for a specific ministry or specific purpose or event or something. But a family would run it, and then you would see families like rotate and stuff. But we would always have meals together after the morning service. So that was pretty cool. But again, you could see that across the board, not just Hispanic churches, but a lot of the smaller Pentecostal churches would do that. They'd love to fellowship and commune together. And well, Latinos, they love to fellowship and eat together too. So here's a good one. Did you ever feel pressure to behave a certain way or be a role model because of your family's position in the church? Yes. Capital Y. Yes. There was pressure to behave a certain way. There was pressure to be the best that I could be because this is my family. And so I have to be able to be a good example too. But that's not pressure that I felt as a kid. I don't ever really remember my parents really giving us, your grandpa's a pastor, so you need to do this type of deal. Like, I don't think they ever did that. But growing up and just being a part of the church, seeing how ministry worked and how people worked together, seeing the influence my grandfather had. And it wasn't just my grandfather. Like, I had uncles that were in the church that were part of leadership as well. My parents were part of leadership, so like when you're in that life, you kind of get a sense of like, okay, like, I know that I'm young, but there is some responsibility as well, Now, mind you, when I wanted to be a kid and have fun, I had fun, but, there were times where I felt like, especially as I became a teenager, like, okay, there is a responsibility that is on my shoulders to behave, to be a role model, to show other young people my age that like, hey, this is what living a life for the Lord looks like, and but many times there was pressure, especially when I was dealing with stuff. And this is kind of where some of the negative comes in. And this isn't just a Latino church thing. This is just a church thing, period. Like, when you're in a position like that where it's like, I know that people are looking at me and it's not like an arrogant thing, like I'm better than everybody else, but like just a common sense responsibility, like, hey, I know that there are other kids who are looking at me. And when you're dealing with stuff, it's really easy to just put a fake face, and put up a front and just be like, oh, I'm good, even though you're really dealing with stuff. So there was pressure, it's, and I think pressure is good. I think it's not just all a negative or unhealthy thing. Like, I think pressure can be a good thing as well. So, what were some of the challenges your family faced as pastors in the Latino community? It's the same as any other community. Obviously with the Latino community, it was a lot of families that came in that just financially were unstable, a lot of broken homes, a lot of families who were separated because, the father was here in the U.S. working and the rest of the family were in Mexico, or vice versa. Mom and the kids are here in the U.S. To try to make a better life, and dad's still on his way, type of thing, and so seeing some of those challenges and those financial things, like, was a real thing in our church growing up. But at the same time, like, I think that it was a challenge that, our church did a pretty good job, like, handling, not that we could help everybody or that we could make everyone's life easy. That's not the promise, right? But the promise is like, we're here. We're going to be with you. Like, when you go through a hard time, we're not going anywhere, and Jesus isn't, and so in that essence, like, the church did a great job. Some of the other challenges were just, egos. I mean, one of the things that I think growing up in a Hispanic church that you saw a lot was just pride, and egos, and just the attitude of, you don't understand how hard I had to work to get here to this point, and because you don't get it, you're wrong, and it was kind of like that perspective. And so, but again, some of those things, even though they may not be exactly the same across the board, you find similar things across different communities communities, different churches, whether they're Hispanic or they're white or they're black or they're Asian, like they're any other churches, like you see those type of dynamics play out. It's not like a one people. It's human. It's a human heart, human condition. Like our pride, our ego gets in the way. So those were some of the challenges. Let's see. How did your family support and encourage your spiritual growth as a child? I mean, they greatly supported it. Anything that had to do with the church, they pushed me, and wanted me to be involved. Anything it took to make it happen, they would always extend a hand to help. I think that's like kind of a no-brainer. Here we go. This is a good question. Did you ever feel, let me repeat that again. Did you ever feel like you missed out on typical childhood experiences because of your family's involvement in the church? Great question. Because we were in church Sunday morning, Sunday night, sometimes Mondays, every Thursday. We had service Friday, and any events happen Saturday, we're there. And then not to mention Tuesday and Wednesdays were the open days, not always open to like go and be at home, but sometimes open for other things that may be going on. So there were weeks that we would be at church like 4 times a week, 5 times a week. And so did we miss out on a lot of things? I didn't feel like I did. I was able to play baseball when I was age 11 until I was about 18, 19. So, and I would, my parents found a way to make it work. I don't know how they did it. Mom and Dad, I don't know how you guys did it now that I have Mateo and T-ball. But my parents found a way to make it work, to get me to games, get me to church when I needed to, them fulfill the obligations at church, But I don't feel like I missed out on anything though, I don't feel like any part of my childhood was taken away, because again, when we were at church, there were usually other kids at church. It was very rare for us to go to church. Like my parents would take us to church, whatever it was, and there not be other kids there. And so when kids are put together in a spot where it's like, oh, we're here on a Wednesday night and there's only like 4 of us, kids are going to find a way to have some fun, right? And so that, like, interacting with other kids, playing, making friends, having those childhood experiences, we had them. They were just at church. And I didn't feel like anything was taken away. In fact, I love when, we have a small group coming up, my wife and I, where we're doing it together, and the kids will be able to go to Kids Zone that whole time. I love that idea, because that's the way that I grew up. We didn't have a Kids Zone, but we had a room where we would go hang out with other kids. And so it's like, I grew up that way. And so to know that that's what my kids, they're going to have a similar experience. Like, I'm like, oh, that's cool. That works. It works. It really does. So, what role did music play in your church experience? My wife and I, Ruthie, we talk about it quite a bit often, how much we miss worshiping in Spanish, how much we miss the music, how much we miss the songs that we would play. It has a great impact, on my life, on my experience, to the point where there are songs that I can listen to and it take me back to certain moments, or bring up people, or bring up my grandfather, and you may say, well, worship music probably shouldn't make you think about other people, but it does, because it reminds me of those moments that I had with the Lord and with God's people. But music played a great role in my experience. I started playing trumpet in worship when I was in like 4th grade. I played for like a year, and I wanted to play drums forever because my Uncle Pete played drums. And so anything he did, it's like, I want to do that too, because my Uncle Pete is the coolest guy ever. Still is. Theo Pete, you're still like the coolest guy ever. And And so I played trumpet, and then I kind of dropped off with instruments from fourth grade to like, I was probably about 14 ish. And my cousin Zeke was playing drums, and he started playing drums in the worship. And then I was like, man, I want to play something. And I'm like, I'm going to play bass because, my dad had played bass before. And another cool guy, Jesus, was playing bass. So I was like, man, these are some cool guys that play bass. I want to play bass. Seems pretty simple. It looks like a guitar, but from what I hear, it's a lot easier. So I started playing bass when I was like 15, and obviously immediately started playing worship. And I'm 35 and I still play bass on the worship. The how do you say the word camaraderie? The fact that you get to like hang out with other people doing worship, other musicians. I'm like looking at Ruthie to see if she would help me, but she's listening to something completely different, so she's not paying attention to me. But like when you get to like hang out with other people doing that, and the relationships that you build, the music is like this like glue that kind of holds everybody together, like the musicians together, the singers together. So I got into that world when I was 15 and just never left, and so it was a huge role in my experience. Like I think music plays a huge role in people's church experiences. They really do. Were there any language barriers that your family or the church community faced? So our church was a mainly Spanish-speaking church. My first language is English. My parents speak Spanish. My sister speaks pretty good Spanish too. My brothers, on the other hand, and I too. Like our Spanish is not our first language, so we kind of would always speak English. I would say that it was never a barrier for our family to be able to like communicate and be part of the community. But the challenge that Latino churches face, Hispanic churches face today, is you have people that go to church who are coming from another country, and they've only been here for a certain amount of time. So Spanish is their first language. English is foreign and second. And so a church does ministry mainly in Spanish. Everything is in Spanish. Music, preaching, teaching, communication, in and out. It's all in Spanish. But these people come and they have children. They have their families here. Or these kids come really young and they start going to school here. And all of a sudden, 10 years down the road, you're looking at a generation that can speak Spanish better than me. They speak Spanish, they can communicate just fine, but they connect in English. And now you have this like wrestle, this tussle of these young people are on top. Okay, young people in general, there's seasons where they become disconnected. They will, because that's just when we're young like that, when we're teenagers, we're finding our own way. So we really sometimes will come off the trail to kind of find our own way sometimes. Well, imagine that. And then you add on the fact that, the sermon is in a language that they don't really connect with. The only time they speak that language is to their mom or dad. Or the only time they hear that language is when they're being told what to do. So you have this like dynamic where like young people are not really connected to the church because the language doesn't connect with them. And so, and honestly, that's what I see. And again, Ruthie and I, we left our church back in 2020. So we had been up with that church all the way up to then. So, that's a lot of the churches that were small, that were struggling to keep young people. That was one of the bigger reasons why. And because of the cultural things that the church wouldn't adopt, like they were afraid to adopt anything different because they were afraid that could become worldly or become confusing. And because they have a congregation there that speaks Spanish and this is the way they do church, but then they have young people who like, hey, we want to try some of these other things, or we want to sing English songs, or we want to be able to like wear jeans and a hat in church. Like, and you have this, older congregation that's like, no, we can't do that. We have to wear this and this, and we can only sing these type of songs. And there's that whole dynamic. And so, that is the biggest barrier in Spanish speaking churches is literally Spanish. It's literally the language. It's literally, if churches can find a way to adapt and not saying stop speaking Spanish or stop doing things in Spanish, but find a way to adapt and become bilingual. Those are the churches that do well. And there are plenty of churches out there that are doing bilingual that do well. And it's a very natural thing. And they have a lot of young people. They have a lot of bilingual Latinos, and it's a great thing to see. So let's see. I'm gonna do a couple more here. I hope this is good. Like I again, this is not just so I can tell you like my church experience, but I hope that you can see like, oh, okay, so some of those things I can relate with. Like if you grew up in church and maybe you're like, I didn't grow up in church, so I don't know anything about this. Then my thing to you would be like, and I'm going to get to here in a second, despite all the ups and downs and all the things that could go wrong and did go wrong and all the things that work well, there's a reason why I'm 35 and I'm plugged into my local church. I love my local church. And why I'm taking my kids every week to church. There's a reason for all that. And so, let's see. Did you ever feel like you had to choose between your personal beliefs and the beliefs of the church community? And I'm going to say yes. And that's because, and it plays into the last one, because I was a youth pastor and really felt like I was in the middle of that dynamic of, and I'm going to put it this way because this is the way that it's phrased, but it's a lot deeper than this. So please don't interpret this like, oh gosh, he's going to bring this. But this is the way that it's explained, but it does go deeper than this. You have the new school and the old school, and I felt like I was in the middle because, again, English is my first language, but I grew up in the old school. Literally the old school is my grandfather, right? So like I was very much like wanting to honor the past, but also finding a way to like take the principles and what worked in the past and using them for today, for the generation today. And so there were many times I felt like, man, there's something in me that doesn't feel like this is right. Like the way that we just did this, or the way that we're making decisions about this, or this decision, it's not right. Like our priority should be, yes, to bring honor and glory to God, but it's to reach people. And we're neglecting this whole group of people just because we don't want to change. And so I wrestled with that personally, and then verbally I would wrestle with other people about it that were on the leadership. And now I'm talking about things when I was older. And so I don't think I ever really argued on theology necessarily. So in beliefs, I didn't argue doctrine. Although I do have some questions about some stuff, but that's a whole nother episode. But when it came to like practical things that we did there, and the convictions that, or the beliefs and why we did those things, there were a lot of things that I pushed back on just because I felt like it just didn't feel right. Like it didn't feel like we were doing the right thing. Not that it was sinful. It's just like, I feel like there's a better way to do that. Or I feel like we're neglecting this whole group of people and it's wrong of us to do that, if that makes sense. So, okay, last question. Looking back, what lessons did you learn from your experience growing up as a pastor's grandkid in a Latino church? I learned a lot of lessons. Some hard, some easier. I think the biggest one that I learned growing up, because my grandfather would always tell us, was the importance in being a servant, the importance of serving the Lord and serving people. And that wherever we were in life, those should be the things that we should look out for and do, pursue those things. My father would always tell me, my papa would always tell me, like, serve the Lord. Read his word, preach his word, study his word, pray, but serve the Lord. And I think the biggest reason for that was because, my grandfather, was able to really live a fulfilled life because of it. Of course, he had us, and, I know that he loved us very much. And sorry that I'm getting emotional, but it's crazy because it's almost been a year since he passed, and he always told us to, serve the Lord. And, I think he knew that if you can do that, if you can serve the Lord, if you can pursue in the opportunities to serve the Lord, and in that you're obviously serving people too, if you can pursue those opportunities and take advantage of those opportunities, what comes back to you is great, and you'll be blessed, and you'll have peace, and you'll have joy, and you'll be fulfilled. There was a little key, or the secret sauce, to a blessed life that my grandfather really found in being able to serve the Lord. And I knew that my grandfather wasn't saying that because, you got to be in church and you got to be good and you got to, stay out of trouble. No. I know for sure that my grandfather really tasted and saw that the Lord was good. And I know that he really wanted us to experience that too. So that's the biggest lesson I learned, is that serving the Lord should be the highest priority. Pursuing those opportunities. And that's why it's important to not just be in church, but serve, be a part of a team, help, volunteer. Even if you're I don't know what I can do something. Everyone can do something. And so, and the whole reason why I'm talking about this, why I'm sharing about my experiences, because church is a big part of my life. Mom, Dad, thank you guys for taking us to church. Thank you for making it a priority. Thank you for, running around trying to get all of us ready and trying to get us on time to church, Jeez, man, I'm a crybaby. My goodness. It's amazing to see people come to Christ and they get plugged into church and they're wow, I didn't know that this other world existed. I didn't know that there was a whole nother part of life that I never tapped into, And the reason that is the church can be awesome. People can be great. But at every church, you're going to find trouble. You're going to find gossip. You're going to find people who aren't pleasant. Every church, you'll find it. Trust me. But what makes that experience like such a wow moment is the presence of God. And God's presence, it dwells amongst the people, amongst his people. And so, see, it's okay if there's one or two people that are grumpy, or somebody over there that's gossiping, or somebody that's giving you weird looks, because God's word says that wherever there are two or more gathered in my name, that I'm there. So you can be in a church among 1,000 people, and 997 of them are grumpy, grouchy, rude, mean-faced, just horrible people. But as long as there are two or more gathered in his name, God's presence is there. And then all of a sudden it goes from a room full of people to a powerful meeting place where God is literally speaking to his people. And it can happen when you're alone, but there's something powerful when you're in a room with other people and you go through this experience and you can look around and go, whoa, did you see that? Did you feel that? Did you sense that? And they're like, yes, I did. I was there. And there's just something crazy about when people come together and they experience that all together. And so, man, if you're not going to church, if you're not plugged into church, you need to be plugged into church. Find a church, find a community, whether you only speak Spanish or whether you only speak English or whether you're black or you're white or you're Asian or whatever. Like, find a church, find a community, get plugged in, and then serve the Lord. Serve the Lord. Serve the Lord. If you do that, I believe, because I've experienced it, and I know that my grandfather experienced it. But if you serve the Lord, you will live a life that is full, that is blessed, that is full of joy, full of love, full of purpose. You'll find that. And so find a church, get plugged in, serve the Lord. Hey guys, thank you so much for letting me cry in front of you today. I hope that you were able to get something out of this. Leave a comment. Let me know, what was your experience like in church? You ever been? What was it like? Was it good? Was it bad? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. I love you guys. Have a great week. Until next time, peace out.